See, did I tell you it was awesome and fabulous? Yeah. In so many levels. The sound. I forgot to warn you that the music is really awesome too. So it's very. Each time I watched it, I got distracted by a different thing. So, but I love to watch. Your working. I can sit and watch somebody else work all day long. So, some questions. How did you guys get together to do this? I don't think that was in the film.
I know the person who owns the building, or the couple that owns the building where the metal collage is. And I didn't know Lance, and I didn't know his work. And I heard about the metal collage. And then I started to do some research, and I saw Lance's paper collages. And I thought it would be interesting to document the creation of a metal collage, since it was going to be a big change in his materials. And so I went out to this person's house. The husband is a metal worker himself, and they had some metal that Lance was going to look at. So I went out and brought a cameraman, and we met Lance for the first time there. And I had already kind of thought, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm going to just shoot this meeting. And the first question that Lance asked me was, don't you want to know about my paper collage? Like, why are you interested in the metal? So he invited us to come to his studio. And that was the beginning kind of our relationship.
Do you have anything to add? What that was like? What was that like to meet Sandra?
It was hard to trust him. I didn't know what Sandra's personality was like, and the cameraman. So it took a few weeks to kind of get comfortable with him before things worked.
I was wondering about that kind. It's such an intimate piece. So many close-ups and your story, and I wondered how you were able to interact and to get that kind of information, interviewing without invading someone's privacy. And you do. I believe you do it very, very delicately. But I'm curious about that process.
I was very cognizant of the fact that Lance is a private person, and I could only imagine that having the intrusion of filmmakers while he's trying to do his work would be a distraction and maybe disturbing to him. And my cameraman, Jason, is a very, very evolved young man. He's, I think, 29 or something, but very wise and very friendly and very sweet. And he and Lance got along really, really well. And Jason had the idea that he didn't want to bring any lights into Lance's studio. We didn't want to have any. It's bad enough to have 2 cameras, and all this gear, and he's got a microphone up his shirt and all that. But we wanted to have a light presence as much as we could. And so Jason went over many times without me for months and months to just hang out with Lance. And behind the scenes, you probably didn't know, but I would check in with you and ask, are you working on the metal? Because at that point, I still thought the film was going to be about making the metal. And Lance took his time making the metal. It wasn't an instantaneous thing, which actually for me ended up being a real blessing. So Jason would go over, and they became fast friends, and they talked a lot. In fact, on a lot of the footage, I just have Jason talking. And I'm like, why is Jason talking? I don't want to hear all this.
All you have to do is ask him one question.
But the result was that they got to be close, good friends, and it helped. It helped Lance understand, that we were just there to get to know him. And then I was there some of the time, not as much time as Jason was, but I would ask Lance, "Are you working on the metal today?" And he would say, "Probably." And so I would call Jason. I'd say, "Can you please go over and spend as much time today as you can?" Because Lance wouldn't just go straight and work on the metal. He would cut some paper, and then he'd go cut some metal, and then he'd come back and glue some paper, and then he would like sort through, and then he would go and do some more metal work. And so we never knew from day to day what he was going to work on or how long he was going to work. And sometimes he'd just be feeding the dogs and talking to Jason, and Jason would be filming. So it was, from my perspective, I just wanted to keep Jason there. I wanted him to be there as much as he was willing to, and thank God he
Work. What was that like for you to have your space and your life so closely? Is that what they call the camera, the unblinking eye?
Yeah.
What was that like for you?
I stopped noticing the camera pretty early on, and Jason, I could ask him a question and he would talk, and I could work. I wouldn't have to talk. But also we had conversations, and then I started liking having people over, instead of being alone all the time. That was really hard. For 11 years, I worked a normal job with 20 other people, and so there was a lot of socialization. One of the hardest obstacles that my transition into full-time art was not having anybody around, and being confronted with stuff that's in my head, that I don't really want anymore, or for whatever reason. You have to work through all that stuff to get comfortable.
Yeah, and I realize that you're using your art process, working, like you say, working through so many things. And you mentioned, there was a couple of quotes that I had. You talk about art and insanity or dysfunctional, and then I heard you say also that you found the process therapeutic. Could you speak to us a little bit about that, about what that relationship is with the process, that creative process, and working with that?
Yeah, I don't really have a philosophical kind of program, that I could just articulate. It's a lot of it is the length of time that I've been doing it. I'll go upstairs and I'll just start moving my hands, cutting something out or putting something next to another thing, and then I'm in this kind of zone. I just go into this zone really easily now.
Would you like me to hold it?
No, I'm not holding.
Okay,
Oh, yeah. So I guess in answer to your question, I don't really have a dogma about that. Okay.
Okay, you ready for some? I know you're itching. And I'm going to give you the microphone so everybody can hear. Is that okay? Okay.
I really enjoyed the time when you were with the staple gun going and the music crescendoed and just see you working. It reminded me of that clip of Jackson Pollock doing his action painting. It was just so entrancing to watch. I was wondering if there was a change or an internal change in you when you went from paper to metal. Did you notice any kind of shift, and what changes had occurred if they did?
The work changed really dramatically. Themes that I had worked on 10 years ago became relevant again because I was using a different material and it had a different feel and a different look than the paper did. So I have a lot of ideas that were dormant. I'd moved past them that work really well in the metal. That's one thing. And the other thing is that it's very physical. I have to press down on the staple gun pretty hard to get it to nail flush with the metal. And moving panels, cutting metal, all those things are really physical. Whereas when I'm upstairs cutting paper, it's, I do that basically. There's not much heavy lifting.
And I realize there was a transition from you going from paper and that very delicate kind of material into this different kind. And then for you, this process was a transition from editing to directing and editing. Could you tell us a little bit about your process?
I'm happy to. I'm a film editor. I don't know if y'all know that, but I'm primarily a film editor. And when I approached this film, a lot of things happened for me to try to understand what my role was going to be that was going to be different from being only the editor. And part of that process for me was creating a narrative out of the material that I had collected. And Lance and I had a lot of conversations about how our processes are similar in terms of me collecting a lot of pieces and then rearranging and selecting certain things and putting them together to create a story. And as a documentary editor, a documentary editor is very instrumental in crafting a story. But as the director and editor, it was solely falling on me to create the piece. And as I got to know Lance and I started to get these little hints about who he was and these details about his life, I started to understand that my interest in the metal collage and the paper collage was just enhanced by the fact that he had a very rich story to be told that included being, an artist, a student, a son, a father, a husband, a provider, a house builder, like there, a disturbed adolescent. There's so many layers of his story that spoke to me. And when I started to get to know him better, and I did a series of interviews with him over the course of a couple of months, I guess, I did a deep dive on a Lance Letscher study mission. So he was very generous to provide me with thousands of images of his artwork over the course of 30 years or something. And so when I started, one of the interviews that I did with Lance was I just asked him, give me a timeline of your life, the greatest hits, of what the things that happened, every couple years. And then I started to look at the work lined up with what was going on with him personally, and I was like, well, obviously that's the interweaving of the editor brain for me, was looking at how his evolution as a man was mirrored in his evolution as an artist. And I couldn't separate those two. So then my story kind of unfolded for me. That's the best I can do on that.
Yeah, it feels very much like you're making a collage of a collage maker. Do you have that sense? Okay, questions?
Lance, in the part where you talked about your dreams, you mentioned not dreaming and being able to access this state of mind where you can, I guess, get things that you need from your unconscious. I forget the words you exactly used, but it seemed like you had some sort of way of going in and getting into that space, and wondering how you do that.
I don't think it's a mystical quality. I don't think it's a spiritual exercise. I think it's force of habit and learning how to rely on intuition and having the patience to allow things to develop the way they want to develop without trying to be rigidly controlling. So it's more mundane. It's, an opportunistic kind of presence when you're doing your work and you don't have too much invested in it. You can move things around and, separate it into two different parts and make two different pieces. I think I've just, over the past 20 years since I've been out of graduate school, I've developed this routine and it became a discipline. It's meditative, pretty much. I mean, when I'm working, I'm thinking about my work and not thinking about anything else most of the time. I don't know. It's a mysterious thing. It's not easy to articulate or to understand.
I'm just curious about where you get the drive and the energy to do your work, and just so allowing of yourself to have your creativity come out. I feel like almost it's a necessity, and it's cathartic. For myself, I feel like I have blocks to my own creativity and things get in the way. And I'd just like to know what your experience is with that, and if you have any suggestions for how people can just express their creativity more.
I think what you said is it kind of goes across the board. Like most of my peers that are artists and people I went to school with and professors that I know, they all have the same thing. They have these blocks, and sometimes it's like they can't take it when the canvas is all white, and they have to make the first mark, or there's a whole list of different kind of categories of ways people block their creativity. And my thing was, for about a 10-year period, kind of identifying those blocks and getting control of them and discarding them. So now when I work, I don't have to, I don't feel a sense of writer's block at all, ever. I just start working and things come out. So I don't know exactly what the transition between being, having these stumbling blocks and being on a clear road is exactly, but it happened over a very long period of time and a lot of repetition.
Did you have something about that? Yeah. As a film editor, I've had that blank canvas too. Like I've had, a film or scenes that need to be crafted into something rather than just raw footage. And I used to agonize over it a lot. And I'd come in the mornings and just be scared. I would feel really scared. And I spoke to another editor, one of my mentors, and I asked him if he ever experienced that feeling of just being afraid that you're going to make a fool of yourself or just stumble around and not actually make anything worthwhile. And he looked at me and he said, yes, of course I feel that every single day. And he said, what I do is I just go, come on, fear, we're going to work today. And I was like, oh my God. And that has stuck with me. I mean, that was 40 years ago that he said that. And so it was freeing for me, because now when I am confronted with, okay, I have to cut this scene and, there's a deadline, I need to get it done. In my mind, I tell myself, just start somewhere. It doesn't matter if it's any good or terrible or great, it doesn't matter. Just start somewhere, and then after you get a few steps into it, you'll start getting a sense. And then that's when the intuitive part of it starts kicking in. But it's just letting it start, and then, I get a sense.
There's one other thing that I thought of when Sandra was talking. A graduate student, when I was an undergraduate, told me, I was trying really hard to make beautiful paintings. And he said, the first 300 paintings don't count. And so it was, it's like, it was very liberating and freeing, because I realized I'm trying too hard to do everything in one piece. And, it's, I think the way that I work now is much more fluid, and things turn out better, and I know how to tweak them, and the technical ability came with experience.
I think you should talk about your designated studio time and what that's always been.
Well, it used to be that my time was really broken up, so I'd only be able to work a couple hours a day sometimes or less. But Now I get up and eat breakfast with my wife, and she goes to work, and I go to work, and work from 9 till 3, and then sometimes 3 to 7. And I don't push myself as hard as I used to, but I'm more efficient at getting things done. Is that what you were thinking? Yeah, every day except Sunday.
Sandra, do you have some sort of discipline or designated, what do you call it, designated studio time? Tell us about it.
Yes, I mean, I work similarly. I go to work at 10 o'clock every morning, and usually I screw around until after lunch, and that's the truth. I mean, it's the truth. I look at the email, and I look at the internet, and I eat, and I drink coffee, and I talk to people, and sometimes I'm like, when is lunch? Even if it's 11:45, I'm like, let's have lunch so I can go to work. And I don't know, it's just some thing that my brain won't really settle down until I've got lunch out of the way. And then once I eat, I can go in, and then I can get like a solid 6 or 7 hours. And that's where I'm most productive. But it's taken me 30 years to learn that about myself. And now I don't fight it. I used to get so frustrated and anxious about that I'm not getting anything done, but now I know it's okay to just relax about it.
I have a question for Lance. Did you formally study collage, or is it just something you gravitated towards?
I studied printmaking mostly when I was in art school, and I had a job for 11 years with another artist doing his prints. And I think that I did learn a lot of collage technique based on the similarity with printmaking. Printmaking is an additive layering process, and you think in levels, the yellow plate, and then the red plate, and then the purple plate, and then the black plate. And with my collages, when they're really complex, I separate them out into gluing order and make them into layers, basically, just so I can understand it better. So that's where that came from. They didn't teach collage, and I was never really I didn't aspire to be a collage artist or anything. I did a lot of other things, a lot of paintings and carvings, and this just seems to be what I was supposed to do, almost.
How about you? Did you study editing, or what is your background? What is your background? That was my question.
I did not go to film school, and I didn't really study film making until I got a job as an apprentice editor. And I really didn't know anything about it, and I learned it on the job. And as soon as I got in the editing room, I just was so inspired and so excited to be there. I was a bit of a sponge for years. I worked as an assistant editor for 10 years in Hollywood with, big feature film editors. And I learned so much about, the vocabulary and the language of film and the craft of editing and just the personal ways to be in the room with a director and producer and a studio head, and I just learned on the job.
Okay, you talked a lot about your dreams, and I remember you saying you would stare at a paper and see the designs like you were creating in your dream. But did you also write down dreams? Like, did you remember dreams, or was this the creation during the dream?
I never have really been one to write dreams down, but I also give them special significance. Maybe more so than other people. I don't know. It's I think there's different categories. There's the anxiety dreams, and there's the unwinding of the spool of the day dreams, and but then there's really special dreams that give you an insight or give you some material to work with, and I have antenna for that. I try to remember that, and I try to remember it when I wake up as much as I can. And that's worked, really. I mean, I can go back 10 years, and I can think of 7 dreams that I could tell somebody and they would understand a lot about me. You know, it really came at as an epiphany, really. So those are the special ones.
How about you, Sandra? What inspires you, or do you? Yeah, yeah.
Well, I mean, someone like Lance inspires me, and music inspires me. Anything that I feel touches my soul as a human being inspires me, and particularly character stories, portraits, things like that, where there's an onion, layers, you know, that kind of thing inspires me. I guess so.
Yeah. There's a lot of taking apart and putting things back together in both your works.
Lance, is there a particular piece or a time period of pieces, because you seem to kind of have threads throughout how it was described in the story, that is your favorite, and if so, why?
My work has really turned the corner, and part of it has to do with the film. It's a really powerful endorsement, and it gave me a higher level of confidence in the studio and the desire to push myself harder. So I think right now my favorite work is the work that I've done over the last 2 weeks. And, you know, the color is really rich and beautiful, and the message is kind of tenuous and fleeting, you know, so it's a good balance right now. But I can think back to when I was 20 years old, and I thought I was better than everybody else in art school, you know, and nobody, you know, I didn't win the scholarships, and, you know, I've always kind of thought my work was really good, maybe better than it was.
I actually have a question for your wife, for Lance, and I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Mary. And the question I have is, a lot of the people in the room here, or some of us anyway, are therapists, and I actually work with a population of actively suicidal and psychotic veterans. But I will say that the bottom line common denominator is the level of creativity in this same population, just this almost drive to create, whether it's music or art or poetry. And what struck me about the story here is how Mary supported you. And the question I have is for, I guess, both of you, how to be that kind of supporter for someone who maybe doesn't have the same control of their brain, or their psychology is a little less stable, but needs that kind of supportive base to be able to enter into that dynamic process where the healing is the art and the art expresses the healing, and it goes back and forth like that.
He's been itching. He's just been itching for you to have an answer.
So, Lance and I are so polar different. I'm the talker. I get on an elevator and I talk to strangers, and Lance is very quiet and reserved, and I'm the loud one in the room. I grew up in a big family, and because of that, I learned different coping skills early on. I can read somebody's body language when I walk into a room, and I know whether or not I want to get near them or I'm going to stay far away. You know, I grew up with not a great home life, but, you know, it taught me to navigate life in a lot of counseling. But Lance and I came together. It was a second marriage for both of us, and I think we made some boundaries early on. No matter what, he gets my back and I get his before anything else. Nobody else gets in there. Nobody. You know, and that's it. You know, we'll allow people, friends and all that, but there's a private space that's just ours, and I'm really good with that, and he is too. I think. Is that it? Is that fair?
Really inspiring, and how you stood by each other And thank you for sharing that and seeing your sons and how you shifted through a dark time and kind of came out of that, and everybody was like aware of it and able to talk about it and have language for it. That was really special and beautiful to witness. So thank you. My question is, and you kind of spoke about this a little bit, but maybe when you spoke about getting out of the way of your unconscious and kind of letting that take over, and you were talking about the manic piece and how you don't really feel like you're manic inside, but you kind of have to get out of the way. Are you aware of that process when it's happening, or is that something you reflect on later? And how can you explain that?
It's definitely something that I'm aware of when it's happening. And when it first started to happen, like 13 years ago or something, I would hear myself breathing while I was working. And I'd know that I was like I was getting into the right frame of mind. For some reason, through my breathing, I would recognize it. It would become more even and steady and, just soothing almost. But now it's just a matter of doing the work, basically. I think I've habituated so many behaviors that I don't really think about it anymore. I just take it for granted almost. I'm grateful for it. But when I'm working, I'm cutting or gluing or laying things next to each other, and things are being produced. Things come out.
Did you have something to add?
Yeah, I just want to, believe me, I don't think I get into that kind of manic state. I don't know that I've ever experienced that in my work. But I do know that sometimes I've been challenged in a way creatively where I am at a loss. And I'll just quickly say that I edited this film called Fast Food Nation, and there was a scene in there about an animal slaughterhouse. And they actually filmed in a Mexican slaughterhouse, actual animals being slaughtered. And I needed to cut the scene. It was a scene that needed to be cut, and there was no one else that was going to do it. And I cut the whole entire movie and never looked at that footage and never approached it until I kind of just had to do it. And I looked to music to be an inspiration for me. And I found some music, and I knew if I could turn off the sound, I would be able to deal with the imagery in a different way that wouldn't be as disturbing for me. And I got this music, and I went in the room, and I shut the door, and I put on headphones, and I just cut the scene. And when I came out, like 5 or 6 hours later, and my assistant looked at me and said, "Did you do it?" And I was like, "Yep, it's cut, it's done, and we're never going to touch it again." And to this day, I cannot remember one single thing that I did. So that was a place where I found the tools in the music, or I found some soothing something in the music, and then I did that. Just got out of the way and started punching buttons, and somehow it got done. I work with Richard Linklater, and I'm his editor. I've worked with him for 25 years, and I've cut 20 movies for him. And he's very busy right now. And so I'm very busy working with him and also getting this film off the ground and out into the world. And so I'm basically doing those two things, and that's all I'm going to be doing for the next few months, I think.
And tell us how this film is made.
Okay, so the exciting thing is that November 7th, which is next Tuesday, the film will be available on DVD on iTunes and Amazon, Google Play, and Vudu. And then in mid-November, it will be broadcast on an arts network called Ovation. And then after that, I don't know, that's where it'll live for a while. Do you want to talk about what you're doing?
Yeah. I've just gotten really busy. I think it has to do with the film, frankly. I have 5 shows between September and this upcoming January. So, yeah, it's a lot. Like, I think I made 100 pieces in 2.5 months. Yeah. The show that opens this week is in New York. The one in September was in Paris. I've got a show up at the new Austin Public Library. It opened last weekend, but it'll be up for 6 weeks or so, I think, till after the holidays. And there's a show at Stephen Clark Gallery, which is on 6th and Baylor, that is coinciding with the library show. So just go to work every day and work and try not to get too freaked out.
Which is what we all do. We all try to not do as much as we can. Thank you so much. Is this awesome? I told you. Thank you so. Really appreciate that.